Well, welcome to week 2 in economics. I wanted to review some insights from the textbook this week. If we look at what you have due this week, I'm looking at the syllabus here. We're looking at chapter 5, 7, and 8. We have the appendix in chapter 5. For your learning team, you have the forum discussion, or for the paper as a learning team, you have that due. Then you also have an individual forum discussion. But what I wanted to do today is go over some insights in the chapter, help give you some guidance for your reading. And the first one is on page 112 to 113 if you want to follow along just going through the textbook. But this discusses price ceilings and price floors. When you think of a ceiling, think of you cannot go above that price. Example is like a rent control, where a price floor says you can't go below a price. So this would be example minimum wage. As long as the equilibrium price is above the floor, there's really no issue. So if the equilibrium price for wages in a market is $10 and the government says you have to pay $7.15, everything's fine. It's only where you have a situation where the equilibrium is below the floor that you end up having a surplus of labor. You could say that causes unemployment. So although the government has good intentions to help the market out, it could actually make things worse off. Again, with the ceiling, think about if they say you can't charge any more than $1,500 for a one-bedroom apartment in Kansas City, and the equilibrium is $1,000 where everything is fine. But if they change it where you can't charge any more than $600, well, probably a lot more people want apartments at $600, and a lot less people willing to supply apartments at $600. Okay. Another thing I want to point out in this chapter is also the idea of an excise tax. An excise tax can be an example of a tariff, an imported good. They show the example on the bottom, page 115, where we shift the supply curve in by the amount of the tax. So you'll notice that the shift goes from 60,000 to 70,000. That's the difference of the 10,000 for the shift. Again, the idea here is that the tax is directly put on the supplier, and because as a result of the tax, we would have less boats and a higher price for those boats in the market. With the appendix in chapter 5 on page 123 to 126, read through that slowly, make sure you understand that. Essentially, we're setting up equations for demand and supply. You're setting those two equations together and you're solving for the price and quantity, to find an equilibrium in a market. So pay particular attention if there is a tax or a subsidy. Walk through the calculations and that will help you with your homework. Next, getting into chapter 7, this is kind of the main thing of this week with elasticity of demand. When we calculate elasticity of demand, we're looking at arc price elasticity, range between 2 points. The reason is if I start from one point and go to another point, say point A to B or B to A, we can actually get different elasticity. So by using the arc price, or as we look on page 157, where they have calculated elasticity of 1.27, elasticity by definition says what is the percentage change in quantity demanded if there's a percentage change in price. So if we have elasticity between 0 and 1, that's considered inelastic. Items such as gasoline, maybe KU basketball tickets would be considered inelastic. But if it's exactly equal to 1, it's unitary, and if the value, an absolute value, is greater than 1, we consider that elastic. That means that people are responsive to changes in price. And this is important for managers to know this, because I want to know that if I change my price, what's going to happen to my total revenues? Bottom line, revenue is price times quantity. So if something is very inelastic, I know that can probably increase my price, and my revenues will actually go up, and profits can go up too. One other thing with elasticity in that chapter, definition of what we call income elasticity demand and cross-price elasticity demand. This ties in those concepts of the 4 types of goods: a normal good, an inferior good, substitute good, complementary good. Well, with income elasticity of demand, if your income goes up and you buy more of that good, that's considered a normal good. The calculation we would get would be a positive value. If our income goes up and we buy less of that good, that would be considered an inferior good. With cross-price elasticity, again, we look at that on page 169. We have the percentage change in demand over the percentage change in price of related good. So this tells me whether the good is a substitute good or a complementary good. If the price of one good goes up and I buy more of the other good, that gives me an example of a substitute good. If the price goes up and I buy less of some other good, it's a complementary good. So we'd actually have a negative calculation. The last thing I want to walk through, this is on page 180 to 181. This deals with consumer surplus and producer surplus. And the idea was actually introduced first by a French engineer, Charles Dupuy, but he wanted to know how much people would be willing to pay to go across a toll bridge before they would take a different route. So when you think of the concept of consumer surplus, if you're willing to pay $1 for a soda and it only cost you 50 cents, you have 50 cents of consumer surplus. Well, to measure the area of consumer surplus and producer surplus, let's start with consumer surplus first. That's the area, we would say, below the demand curve and above the price. So if we're looking at page 180, we see this green shaded region for consumer surplus. And we're going to calculate this area by using the formula for a calculation of a triangle. That's area equals base times height times 1/2. So if I look at this green shaded triangle on page 180, I see that my height I can measure from $5 to $10, and that's 5. The base, I go from 0 to 5 units, so that's 5. So if I take 5 times 5, which is 25, and take 1/2 of that, I have consumer surplus. Producer surplus, on the other hand, is the area above the supply curve but below the price. So again, if I want to find the area of this triangle, I take from 0 to $5 as the height, I take 0 to 5 as the base, and that also gives me 25, and I would take 1/2 of that. Okay. The reason we examine consumer and producer surplus in this chapter is we asked you, what if there's a tax, or who bears the burden of this tax? You know, if demand is very inelastic, it's almost entirely going to be borne on the individual. Examples of this can be gasoline, cigarettes, alcohol, where they know that the demand is highly inelastic and the government can tax these more heavily because they would be willing to pay more of the burden of that tax. So these are some insights from the week. Just kind of want to give you a general summary to help you out. Again, if you have any questions, make sure to email me, but otherwise have a great week, and that will be it for the week.